Well, Reynolds is an international human rights lawyer with the consulting firm Strategy for Humanity. She specializes in refugee and migrants' rights. Sarnata is also Global Migration and Policy Advisor to Oxfam International. Welcome to our broadcast. Back to our broadcast. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Is there anything that really surprises you or shocks you when you see these photos and when you hear these stories?
Obviously, I've engaged with people in this situation for many years, and so the trauma that they're experiencing, unfortunately, isn't new. But what always amazes me is the resilience of people, like the ability to stand back up again after they haven't slept enough and they don't have enough food, and kids are obviously scared, and so are parents, and they somehow manage to get up every single day and do the best with what they have, and that's amazing to me.
Let's talk about the migrants who really are stranded in their own countries with these strained economies. What is their fate?
So for those who are inside their own countries and displaced, so it could be by natural disaster, by conflict, it's very difficult because their own countries obviously have the responsibility to protect them, to make sure they have access to safe water, to shelter, to housing. And when it is not delivering, the international community is failing to provide sufficient intervention. And by that, I don't mean military intervention. I mean, it could be humanitarian support or a stern hand, if you will, so that they will exercise political will that's to the benefit of their own people.
We were talking earlier about past wars. Is there any frame of reference that we can learn from? How do we move forward? What is the answer?
So, it's a great question. And the only other period of history or, more recent history that has any sort of precedent is World War II, when there were also millions and millions of people all over the world displaced from their homes because of war, conflict. And, it really, now looking back, it was an incredible moment because it created the United Nations. There was recognition that we don't want this to happen again. And to avoid it, we have to come up with a plan to help people, to help those who are displaced and those who can't go home. So the 1951 Refugee Convention came out of the aftermath of World War II. The statelessness conventions came out of the aftermath of World War II. In 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights came out of the aftermath of World War II. So there was an incredible amount of willingness to try to get this right for next time. But that willingness doesn't exist right now.
So let's talk about the recent EU deal with Turkey to stem the flow of these migrants. Now we have many more, thousands risking their lives trying to cross to Italy from Libya across the widest stretch of the Mediterranean.
Yeah, it's a very unfortunate series of events in Europe, and not just in Europe, it's around the world. That deal, the EU-Turkey deal, is basically creating a situation in which Greece and Turkey are having to continue housing thousands and thousands of refugees and migrants that they don't have the capacity to help. It's offshoring what is an international obligation to help people. And these countries don't have the capacity, but the rest of Europe is saying we're not willing to help in the way that they should. And it's striking particularly because it's Europe, and Europe is really the heart of where the human rights regime obviously arose. And unfortunately, and hope this could well obviously be another marker of worse things to come in the the rights and protection of people on the move.
In the short term, Sarnata, what is the answer?
So in the short term, the UN, again, through the UN, member states have decided to create a global compact on refugees and a global compact on migrants. And there was a lot of negotiations toward that over the summer, and they're supposed to both come into effect, or sort of be negotiated and come into effect by the end of 2018. And that's a good thing. It's good that nations are coming back together to talk about what do we do now. There's definitely recognition that this is a big deal and they need to do something in a coordinated way. For migrants, our biggest concern at Oxfam International is that they, that their rights and their agency are both recognized and promoted. And we're concerned that if the migration policy or sort of governance that comes out of this is focused on enforcement and sort of a national security lens, then the inevitable consequence will be more xenophobia, more racism, which doesn't help refugees or migrants, and it really doesn't help communities that are willing to accept them oftentimes, and certainly have to absorb them when they live in border areas or near shores.
We need some sort of international conference to deal with xenophobia and the political fallout from all of it.
So it's interesting, yes. And the UN also has launched a campaign on combating xenophobia and racism, which remember that UN is member states. Mm-hmm. So again, there's recognition that this is a problem. It's a problem that around the world, the rhetoric around refugees and migrants creates danger for them. But it's going to continue to happen when the only response countries are willing to have is a deterrence, enforcement, and national security lens. I mean, that it's inevitable. That's if that's the only way political leaders are willing to talk about refugees and migrants, then that's talking about them as the other, as something to be threatened by, mm-hmm. and to stop. And that caricature, of course, is xenophobic and leads to racism.
Well, Sarnata Reynolds, thank you so much on this very important day for reminding us of all of this. We appreciate your time.
Well, thank you.